In this video, I will discuss the bones of the skull and their location. The skull consists of 22 bones and we have divided them into two groups. One is the facial bones and the other one is the cranial bones. Facial bones are those bones which form the face, while cranial bones are those bones which form a protective covering around the brain. And we have further subdivided the facial and the cranial bones into paired and unpaired bones. Now let's begin with the cranial bones. So for that we have to move to a different model. In this model, all the bones are colored differently so you can identify them easily. Cranial bones consist of 8 bones. Among the 8 bones, 2 of them are paired and the rest of the 4 are unpaired bones. For now, just understand the concept of paired and unpaired bone the way I see it. If a bone is present in the midline of the body, then it should be single bone. And if a bone is present on one side of the body, such as for example this bone, then it should be paired bone because the human anatomy is bilateral. First, we will discuss the paired cranial bones. These include the parietal and the temporal bone. In this model, this is the parietal bone. There are 2 parietal bones as you can see. And this is the temporal bone. There's one temporal bone over here and the second one over here. Now we move to the unpaired cranial bones. These include the frontal bone. This yellow is the frontal bone. The occipital bone. This purple is the occipital bone. For the third and fourth unpaired cranial bone, we have to move to a different model. In this model, I have hide the frontal and parietal bone so that you can have a look at the interior of the skull. This green is the ethmoid bone, and as you can see, it is in the midline of the body, so it is a single bone. And this is the sphenoid bone. This bone is also in the midline posterior to the ethmoid bone. Now let's move toward the facial bones. There are 14 facial bones and we have subdivided them into two groups, the paired and the unpaired. First we will discuss the unpaired facial bone, and these are 2 in number. First one is the vomer bone. In the inferior view, this pink is the vomer bone. You can also see this bone at the anterior view. This is the vomer bone. The second unpaired facial bone is the mandible bone. This is the mandible bone. Now let's move toward the paired facial bones. There are 6 paired facial bone. Number 1 is the zygomatic bone. This is the zygomatic bone. And as you can see, these are 2 in number. Number 2 is the lacrimal bone. This is the lacrimal bone. And as you can see, these are also 2 in number. One is here and the other one is here. The third one is the inferior nasal concha. And these are the 2 inferior nasal conchae. The fourth bone is the palatine bone. In the inferior view, this is the palatine bone. And as you can see, there is a suture in between them. So these are the two palatine bones. The fifth bone is the maxillary bone. This is the maxillary bone. There is a suture called the intermaxillary suture present between the two bones, which tells us that these are the two separate bones. This is the first maxillary bone and this is the second maxillary bone. For the last bone, we have to move to a different model. In this model, the last paired facial bone is the nasal bone. These are the two nasal bones separated by this suture. This was just a brief overview about the skull bone. We will discuss each of the skull bone in detail. Thank you.